Imagine this, the sound of police sirens slicing through the quiet of a suburban street, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of houses where neighbors peek through blinds, whispering, wondering what chaos has unfolded. And there I was, standing in front of my own driveway, my own property, accused of blocking it by none other than Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman who thrived on control, who lived for confrontation, who believed rules were weapons and neighbors were pawns. You think you've heard stories about HOA Karens before, but you haven't heard mine, because mine didn't end with a fine or a warning or even a police report. Mine ended with me being summoned to my command office, my career on the line, my reputation dangling by a thread. And yet, what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just any neighbor. I was a Formula One driver, 40-plus years old, seasoned by speed, sharpened by battles, and I had no intention of letting her win. This wasn't going to be a story of authorities stepping in. This was going to be a story of revenge. Crafted, patient, personal. And it all began with a driveway. It was a crisp morning, the kind where the air feels alive, where the silence of the neighborhood is broken only by the distant hum of traffic. I had parked my car, my pride, my machine, across my own driveway, not on the street, not blocking anyone else, just across my own entrance, because I was unloading gear from the trunk. Formula One isn't just the job, it's a lifestyle. Every piece of equipment matters, every detail counts, and I was meticulous. But Karen, she saw it differently. She saw it as an opportunity. She marched across the street, her face twisted into that familiar scowl, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't park there," she barked, as if she owned the asphalt beneath my tires. I laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. "Karen, this is my driveway." But she didn't care. She pulled out her phone, dialed the police, and within minutes, the sirens came. The officers stepped out, confused, almost embarrassed. They looked at me, then at Karen, then at the car. "Sir, is this your property?" one asked. I nodded. "Yes, and that's my car." They exchanged glances, realizing the absurdity of the situation. But Karen wasn't done. She spun her tale, exaggerated every detail, painted me as reckless, as dangerous, as someone who thought rules didn't apply. And the officers, bound by procedure, had no choice but to file a report. That report made its way to my command office. And suddenly I wasn't just dealing with Karen. I was dealing with the weight of my career, the shadow of scandal, the threat of suspension. Karen had struck, and she thought she had won. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the patience of a driver who could wait for the perfect moment to overtake at 200 miles per hour. She didn't know the precision of someone who lived for strategy, who thrived on turning pressure into victory. She didn't know that revenge for me wasn't about anger. It was about art. I played the role at first. I let her believe she had the upper hand. I attended the HOA meetings where she strutted like a peacock, enforcing rules no one cared about. I listened as she bragged about keeping the neighborhood in order. I watched her smile when she thought she had humiliated me. And all the while, I planned. Revenge isn't about rushing. It's about waiting. It's about letting the villain write their own downfall. And Karen was writing hers every day. She was arrogant, careless, convinced she was untouchable. But I knew better. I knew that every empire built on fear eventually crumbles, and I was going to push it over. The suspense grew with each encounter. She started leaving notes on my door, petty warnings about lawn height, about trash bins, about noise. She called the HOA board whenever she saw me working late in the garage, accusing me of disturbing the peace. She even tried to rally neighbors against me, whispering lies, sowing seeds of doubt. But what she didn't realize was that I was listening, watching, collecting. Every note, every accusation, every lie, it was all fuel, and I was building a fire. The day of reckoning came quietly. No sirens, no shouting, no spectacle. Just me, Karen, and the truth. I had gathered everything, her false reports, her harassment, her lies, and I confronted her not with anger, but with calm precision. I showed her the evidence, laid it out like a track map, every curve, every straight, every detail, undeniable. She tried to deny it, tried to twist the narrative, but the walls were closing in. Neighbors who had once been silent began to speak, emboldened by the truth. The HOA board, tired of her tyranny, began to question her authority. And Karen, for the first time, looked small. She looked powerless. She looked defeated. But my revenge wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming control. I didn't want her punished by authorities. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own actions, to realize that her empire of fear had collapsed because of her own arrogance. And she did. She withdrew, slowly, painfully, her voice fading, her presence shrinking. The woman who once called police on me for blocking my own driveway now avoided eye contact, now crossed the street to escape confrontation, now lived in the shadow of her own downfall. And I walked away, not just victorious, but free. Free from her tyranny, free from her lies, free to live without the constant hum of her interference. The suspense of the story lingered, the emotions raw, the revenge sweet. Karen had thought she could control me, thought she could ruin me, thought she could win. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that a Formula One driver doesn't just race on tracks. He races in life. He strategizes, he waits, he strikes. And when he does, it's not just a victory, it's a masterpiece. My masterpiece, my revenge, my story. And it all began with the driveway. Karen thought she had silenced me after the police report reached my command office, but what she didn't realize was that she had only lit the fuse. My career was suddenly under scrutiny, my bosses questioning why my name was tangled in neighborhood drama. I kept my composure in front of them, but inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. I wasn't going to let Karen's petty power trip derail decades of discipline and victories on the track. The suspense grew each day. Karen strutted around the neighborhood like she had won a championship, her smug smile plastered across her face whenever she saw me. She even started bragging to other neighbors about how she put me in my place. But what she didn't know was that I was quietly setting the stage for her downfall. I began studying her patterns the way I studied rival drivers. Just like on the track, every move mattered. Karen had routines, her morning walks, her obsessive inspections of lawns, her late-night prowls to catch rule breakers. I observed, I noted, I waited. Revenge wasn't going to be loud, it was going to be precise. One night, I set my plan in motion. I knew Karen's weakness, her obsession with control. She thrived on catching others, but she never thought anyone was watching her. I started small, subtle reminders that her reign was cracking. Anonymous notes slipped under her door, pointing out her own violations. Trash bins left out too long, lights left on past curfew, lawn not trimmed to regulation. Each note was signed only with a symbol, a checkered flag. Karen grew paranoid. She stormed into HOA meetings, demanding investigations, accusing neighbors, but no one admitted to anything. The suspense was delicious. She was unraveling, and I was the one pulling the strings. Then came the grand maneuver. I staged a scene, carefully, like setting up a perfect overtake. Karen loved to patrol the street at night, flashlight in hand, searching for infractions. I left my car parked legally, but with a hidden camera trained on her. As expected, she approached, muttering, circling, and then she crossed the line. She scratched the paint, deliberately, thinking no one would know, but I knew, and I had proof. The next day, I revealed it, not to the police, not to the HOA board, but directly to her. I handed her a photo, a still from the footage, her hand caught in the act. Her face drained of color. She stammered, tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. And I leaned in, my voice calm, steady, the way I spoke before overtaking it 200 miles per hour. I tried to ruin you, Karen, but now you've ruined yourself. From that moment, she avoided me. Her empire collapsed. Neighbors whispered about her hypocrisy, her lies, her downfall. She was no longer the queen of the HOA. She was just Karen, the villain who lost. And me, I walked away victorious, not because the authorities stepped in, but because I had crafted my revenge with precision, patience, and control. The race was over. The checkered flag was mine. Karen's paranoia was only the beginning. Once she realized someone was watching her, she spiraled deeper into suspicion. She started pacing her yard at odd hours, glaring at every passing car, even accusing children riding their bikes of spying. The neighborhood, once quiet, now felt like a racetrack under floodlights. Every move scrutinized, every sound amplified. And I was the one orchestrating it, lap after lap, tightening the pressure, waiting for her to make the fatal mistake. I knew she thrived on control, so I began dismantling it piece by piece. I timed my garage work to coincide with her patrols, revving engines just enough to remind her of the power she couldn't touch. I left subtle clues, chalk marks on sidewalks, a checkered flag sticker on her mailbox, a faint tire track across her lawn. Nothing illegal, nothing she could prove, but enough to gnaw at her mind. She stormed into HOA meetings, trembling with rage, demanding answers, but no one believed her anymore. To them, she was unraveling. To me, she was exactly where I wanted her. The suspense built like the final laps of a race. Karen was losing grip, her confidence slipping, her empire crumbling. And then came the decisive strike. I knew she kept files, stacks of reports, photos, accusations against neighbors. She bragged about them, flaunted them like trophies. So I waited until she left for one of her obsessive patrols, and I slipped into action. A simple distraction, a neighbor's dog let loose, barking down the street, gave me the window. I entered her yard, careful, precise, and I found the stash. Her files, her evidence, her arsenal of lies. I didn't destroy them, that would have been too easy. Instead, I rearranged them, exposing her hypocrisy. Photos of her own violations placed on top, her own infractions highlighted, her own words twisted against her. When she returned and saw the chaos, she panicked. She accused everyone, screamed at the board, threatened lawsuits. But the neighbors had had enough. They turned on her, one by one, voices rising, demanding her resignation from the HOA. And in that moment, Karen realized she was finished. Not because the police stepped in, not because the authorities punished her, but because I had engineered her downfall with the same patience and precision I used on the track. She avoided me after that, her power gone, her voice silenced, and I walked away with the quiet satisfaction of victory. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about control. It was about turning the villain's own weapons against them, and I had done it flawlessly. The race was over. The checkered flag waved. Karen had lost. Karen's downfall wasn't instant. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling, and that's what made it satisfying. Every day felt like another lap in a race, another chance to tighten the gap, another moment to push her closer to the wall without ever touching her. She had built her identity around being the enforcer, the one who policed everyone else. But now she was the one under the microscope, and I was the one holding the lens. Her paranoia grew so thick it was almost visible. She started installing cameras around her house, pointing them at neighbors' yards, convinced someone was plotting against her. The irony was delicious. She had become the very thing she accused others of being. Neighbors whispered about her, laughed behind closed doors, but I stayed silent. Silence was my weapon. Silence made her wonder. Silence made her fear. I began weaving racing metaphors into my revenge, subtle reminders of who I was and what I represented. A checkered flag left in her mailbox, a tire mark across her driveway, perfectly curved like a racing line. A flyer from a Formula One event slipped under her door. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew they were directed at her, and that uncertainty gnawed at her more than any confrontation ever could. The suspense built like a storm. Karen started showing up at HOA meetings with binders full of evidence. But the board had grown tired of her antics. They rolled their eyes, dismissed her complaints, and slowly began to distance themselves. She was losing her grip, and I was tightening mine. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the climax of the race. Karen, desperate to prove she still had power, staged her own confrontation. She stood in front of my driveway one evening, blocking me, daring me to react. Neighbors gathered, watching, waiting. She shouted accusations, claimed I was dangerous, reckless, a menace. But I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I simply revealed the footage, the video of her scratching my car, the proof of her hypocrisy. The crowd gasped. Karen froze. Her empire collapsed in an instant. The neighbors turned on her, voices rising, demanding accountability. She tried to deny it, tried to twist the truth, but the evidence was undeniable. And I stood there, calm, steady, victorious. Karen retreated after that, her voice silenced, her power gone. She avoided me, avoided the neighbors, avoided the meetings she once dominated. And I walked away with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had won. Not through the authorities, not through punishment from someone else, but through patience, precision, and control. The race was over. The checkered flag waved. Karen had lost, and I had claimed victory. Karen's silence became the loudest sound in the neighborhood. The woman who once barked orders, who once called the police over nothing, who once strutted into HOA meetings like a tyrant, now avoided everyone. Her empire had collapsed, not because of fines or officers, but because of her own arrogance turned against her, and I had orchestrated every lap of her downfall. But the story didn't end with her retreat. The final act was about me reclaiming my peace. I stood in my driveway one evening, the same spot where it all began, the same place where she had tried to humiliate me. The air was still, the street quiet, neighbors watching from behind curtains. I revved my car, the sound echoing like a victory anthem. It wasn't just noise, it was a declaration. I had won. Karen appeared at her window, pale, defeated, her eyes hollow. She didn't step outside. She didn't shout. She simply watched, powerless, as I claimed the space she had tried to take from me. And in that moment, I felt the weight lift. The suspense that had hung over me for months dissolved. The revenge was complete. I didn't need the authorities. I didn't need punishment handed down from someone else. I had engineered her collapse with patience, precision, and control. The same skills that had carried me through decades of racing. Formula One taught me that victory isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about endurance. Sometimes it's about waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when you do, it's not just a win, it's a masterpiece. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Neighbors smiled again, laughter returned, the fear of Karen's watchful eye gone. And me? I walked with my head high, not as a victim, not as a man accused, but as the hero who had taken back his life. Karen faded into the background, her reign forgotten, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale. And I carried on both on the track and off, knowing that I had faced down a villain and won, not with anger, not with chaos, but with strategy. The race was over. The checkered flag waved. The hero had crossed the line. And Karen, she was left in the dust, watching from the sidelines, powerless, defeated, forgotten.